All right, guys, today we got a special guest now. Some of you may not know her by name, but her work in the industry is undeniable with the Rap Coalition and brokering some of the biggest deals in hip hop history. I'm talking about the one and only Wendy Day.
Hey, how are you? I'm so happy to be here.
I'm glad that you're here too. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm really good. I'm in Atlanta. The weather's beautiful. It's not too hot, but it's warm enough, and it's been a beautiful day.
So I like to start at the beginning, right? Just so we can give the people a better idea of where you came from, who you are, and how you got to where you are today.
Sure.
So you're originally from Philly.
I am. I started listening to hip hop in 1980 when the music was brand new. Like, it wasn't even called hip hop back then. It was just something special coming out of the Bronx, being sent down to Philadelphia on cassette tapes. That's how long ago it was.
Wow.
And I discovered it from going to a concert with the Psychedelic Furs, and the opening act was Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And I fell in love. I fell in love with the syncopated rhythm that they had. I fell in love with the music, the storytelling, their little matching outfits. It was incredible.
Which part of Philly were you growing up in?
The suburbs, Cheltenham.
Okay. And did you grow up with any siblings?
Yes, I have an older sister. We are both adopted. We were adopted from separate families as babies, like so young, I don't remember. I was 2 months old when I was adopted.
Wow.
And I only emphasize that. I mean, I was raised to feel like they were my parents, even though I always knew I was adopted. But I emphasize that only because in January of 2020, my biological sister found me. And so I went to bed one night with just one older sister, Bonnie, and then I woke up the next morning and I had 5 siblings all of a sudden. It was crazy.
Did you ever meet your biological parents?
I did not.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I did not.
But what did your adopted parents do for work?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, housewife. And my dad worked at the post office. He was the person when you went in to buy stamps, he was the guy at the window that was selling stamps.
Okay. And I heard in an interview you described like your childhood as you were living in a suburb, pretty rich area, but it was like you guys were the family that wasn't rich, that wasn't doing well as far as financially. Right. Yeah. And you know, in a lot of places, that's more common than people think. That it's, you know, they think that it's like, oh, just because you're in the suburbs, you're doing well, but that's not necessarily true. A lot of times people are having difficulty being there, you know?
Exactly. You know, we were very lower middle class. My parents lived on a single salary, which was really hard to do back then, just as it is today. Probably not as hard as it is today, but it was challenging. Either we were poor, we weren't starving poor. I never missed a meal, but either we were poor or my parents were just really cheap. I'm not sure which, but I don't believe they had money. I think we were relatively poor. We lived in a twin house. A twin house is like a duplex, like a side-by-side duplex.
Right.
So I grew up in a neighborhood where the houses were like 3,000 to 7,500 square feet. And my sister and I, we grew up in a house that was probably under 1,000 square feet.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was substantially smaller. It was on the edge of a very wealthy Jewish neighborhood. We weren't Jewish. We were Christian. So I was always the outsider. I was the poor chick. I was the Christian chick. I was, you know, the chick that didn't get a car when I turned 16. You know, I didn't get tens of thousands of dollars for a bat mitzvah when I turned 13, but it was never a problem. Like, I don't say that because I felt shorted or I felt left out. I didn't at all. I grew up really happy. I was very independent. I used to like to go on adventures, like I always explored. I still do. Like that's still part of my value system today. But I remember playing a lot as a kid. I would get on my bicycle and I would just ride it. Like I would go really far. And first of all, like it's amazing today when I think about that, because if I had kids, I would not want them to do what I was doing as a kid. I would ride like 10 miles away from the house. You know, I would go
Wow.
downtown. I would hop on the bus at the corner of my block to the subway and then take the subway to downtown Philly and walk around downtown at like 12, 13 years old. And that's probably not a good idea.
Right. So you were an explorer.
Very much so. Yep. I
How
think
else would
one,
you?
I'm
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I think one of the secrets to my success or anybody's success is I was always comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm.
I was never a kid, and I'm like that as an adult. I was never the kid that had to be uncomfortable. Like I could be in a room full of people different than me and not feel weird.
It made you adaptable.
I was extremely adaptable. I still am. I am just as comfortable in a boardroom as I am in the trap. And that's just weird. When you think about that, like as somebody my age to be comfortable no matter where I am, it's just kind of bizarre. And I used to think it was because I was just comfortable with myself and comfortable in my own skin. And then I went to therapy and realized I'm not comfortable really with myself. It's something that I've been working on for the past couple of years. I am now, like I'm very comfortable with who I am, but I wasn't. So I'm not exactly sure where that came from or what that caused, what caused that, but I'm really thankful for it. Like it's something I'm really grateful for because I could be in a meeting or I could be hanging out on the streets and be just as comfortable.
Well, let me ask you this. So maybe, you're not comfortable with who you are, but you know who you are. And that makes it so that you thrive in any kind of situation because you know exactly who you are as a person.
It could be, but I feel like I just found out who I am. Like, not that you're trying to like psychoanalyze me, but let me tell you. So I learned a lot about myself just in the past 3 years because when I was a kid, I grew up in an environment where I was taught to always put other people first.
Mm.
So, for example, if I had a sandwich and you didn't, I was taught as a kid to either give you that sandwich or share that sandwich with you. So I come very much from the mindset of pleasing other people. I learned as an adult that when you have clients, you're supposed to do what they want at all cost. So I didn't really learn who I was or what made me, like Wendy, happy until 3 years ago when I finally figured it out. I mean, I kind of sort of had an idea. Like I knew I liked to travel. I knew I liked art. So I knew the basics. But what's really weird is I didn't really feel emotion the way most people do. Like I had happy, sad, and angry. And to be really honest with you, like sad just pissed me off and made me angry. So really I had happy and angry. And angry gave me energy and happy gave me energy. So those were the two emotions that I really focused on and felt the most. And now I've got a full range of emotion. Like I kind of feel it all. It's weird to me still.
So I want to backtrack a little bit where you were saying that like you were taught to share what you had, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
something that your parents pushed upon you?
Yes. Yes. And it doesn't escape me that that's also very Christian values. I was raised Protestant and I think, the church, and I'm not downing anybody that believes in church. I do not personally, but I think the church wants people to conform. And the best way to do that is to teach them Christian values. And there's nothing wrong with Christian values. I really love who I am and I love my belief system, but I'm definitely not a conformist anymore.
Right.
I'm more of an activist than anything. And I have been since my early 30s.
And in regards to your extreme emotions of happiness or anger,
Sending.
right? Um, was that something that your parents didn't allow you to like process emotions or show emotions?
Correct.
Because I know
Correct.
for men, like we're told not to express,
Cry.
right, express
You're taught not
sadness.
to
We
cry.
can't cry, those type of things.
Correct.
So then we express our emotions through anger, you know, and it
Yes.
doesn't provide the same kind of relief.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And yes, my sister and I were both taught that, and I don't want to speak for her, so I'll just speak for me. I remember distinctly crying as a little kid and being told, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. So I learned at a very young age
It's
to
very
not
old
cry.
school. It's
Yeah.
very old school.
I remember getting in trouble as a kid. And I remember my mom would threaten and say, wait till your father comes home, and I'd be terrified because, when daddy walked in the door at 6 o'clock, I was probably going to get spanked. And I didn't come from an abusive family at all, but back then spanking was normal. Like it's how parents, discipline their children. And I remember being terrified. And I also remember getting spanked and not showing emotion. Like I was very defiant as a child. And I'm
Mm.
sure that came from that lesson of, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about.
How would you describe yourself though as a child? Like, were you really into sports,
No.
school,
Yes.
music?
No. I was very into music. I don't have an athletic bone in my body even now. Like I just dropped 120 pounds in the past year, a little over a year. And I hate working out. I just started last night a ballet class because I'm looking for some sort of movement with my body that I won't despise.
Right. It's like you're
I'm not
working
an
out
aerobic.
without thinking about you working out,
Correct.
basically.
Correct. I need something to trick me into working out, and like aerobics is not it. I'm not a jogger. Like I'll never do that shit. I like to think that I will, but I won't. And so I was never athletic. I was never into sports or team sports. I remember playing kickball with the neighborhood kids when I was a kid, but I didn't love it. It was more community oriented than sports or competition oriented. I was the kid in the neighborhood that everybody came to when they had a problem because I could fix it. Like I was always very analytical and would research to find answers. I remember when two kids were fighting, one of the other neighborhood kids came and knocked on my door and said, you got to come quick. These two guys are fighting. And I remember going down the street and breaking up the fight. So I was the person that they came to mediate, which is funny because that's kind of what I do as an adult. And it was just, it was a great childhood. I really enjoyed being a kid. Like I said, I was very independent. I was adventurous. I was a problem solver and I was always into education. I always enjoyed school. I never did homework, which was kind of fucked up. Can I curse?
Of course.
Okay, good. I never did homework, which was kind of fucked up, but I was somebody that enjoyed reading. I remember as a kid in the summer, my mom would take my sister and I to the bookstore or the library once a week and let us pick out a new book. So we were either allowed I almost said rent. We were allowed to take out from the library a book and then we'd bring it back a week later and get a new one. Or we'd go to the bookstore and she'd actually buy us a book, which was really cool,
Right.
And that's a fond childhood memory. That was in the summertime. I do remember reading. I remember going to the school library and taking out books and reading even during the school year. And I still do that. I read a book a week. It's mostly personal growth and business that I read now, but I still am an avid reader. I read a book a week or I listen to an audio book.
You were a painter, right? And into art restoration?
Not really art restoration. In the summer, I had a job painting signs at the beach. So I would go down to the beach in New Jersey from June through September during my college years. And that's how I made money painting in the summer. That's what paid. I put myself through college. That's what paid for my undergraduate degree. Was painting
Wow.
signs. And that was a lot of fun. I'm still artsy fartsy.
Mhm. All right, so let's go back. You're growing up in Philly in the 60s, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Mid.
this is the
Yep.
civil rights era. And I
Yes.
get you were a little kid at the time, but I'm sure you got to see a little bit and you also lived through the 70s. So
Yes.
take us through what was Philly like during that time. What are you seeing when you walk the streets?
I actually didn't see much in terms of that because I didn't have the awareness. My grandmother owned a card and gift shop in West Philadelphia, and it was in the hood. It was on Chester Avenue, 54th and Chester in Philly, which is still a pretty rough neighborhood. But even as a kid, it was a rough neighborhood. And I spent a lot of holidays over there working in her store and helping her out. Um, I didn't really, other than that, I didn't really experience Black culture. And that wasn't really an experience. Like I was inside of a store helping my grandmother sell cards and gifts, right? It wasn't like I was out on the street, fight the power at Malcolm X rallies. I didn't really learn about Black culture until the 80s when I read Alex Haley's book on Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X, which fascinated me. I went and did a deeper dive. Like Malcolm talked about when he was incarcerated, there were some books that he read, and he actually listed the books that he read, and they were mentioned in that book. And at the time, I was living in New York City, so I had access to the Schomburg Center. I had access to NYU's library. Okay, this is a funny story. So, you know how most kids that are under 21 will bootleg a driver's license so they can go drinking at the clubs?
Right.
That was not me. I bootlegged a New York University um, uh, student ID so
ID.
that I could get into the library and borrow books for free. Isn't that crazy? That's my mindset, right? So I went and read, I think there were 11 books that Malcolm talked about, and I think I found 7 or 9 of them. And then that led me down the rabbit hole of Black nationalism, the slave trade. Like there were just certain areas that really intrigued me in terms of Black history that we didn't get when we were in school, and I say this as a white person in a predominantly white school. There were people of color in my school, and American history kind of glossed over Black history in the 60s and 70s when I was in, grade school, middle school, and high school, which is really fucked up.
Right.
But I ended up going to Temple University. Again, I'm from Philly. I moved to New York City because I wanted to be around hip hop. But I waited until I got to New York and then had to commute back to Philly on the train in order to take master's classes at Temple University. And I chose Temple because the program is Afrocentric. So they were very focused on making sure that the reading material was written by people of color and African history was dictated by Africans. It wasn't like white folks writing about the history. Not that white people can't, write about history, but it just was more of an authentic program than other African American history programs. And that's what attracted me to Temple. And that's why I was willing to commute to, to the master's program at Temple.
Right. That's when you did like your studies of like 500 years of African history, basically,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to go back though. When you're growing up in the 60s, like what are you seeing on TV though? Was it really being broadcasted at that time that you remember?
Well, I do remember. It really wasn't like it wasn't, and if it wasn't being broadcast in my house. Like
Right.
that's not what my parents chose to watch. I remember Nixon getting impeached. I do remember that. I remember the space flights, like NASA. Anytime they were sending a rocket into space, we would get off from school. So we were allowed to come home at like lunchtime, and our families would be gathered around the television to watch the takeoff of the rockets. So I do remember that. I remember a lot of sitcoms. I remember a lot of firsts. Like I remember the Jeffersons. I remember other television shows that had like Black characters, but for the most part, It was not prominent. It was not prevalent. It's still not today. It's still completely out of balance today. I don't want to imply that it's gotten better. It really hasn't, maybe a hair better, but it's still not representative, of culture. And that includes all people. Like, there are very few like Asian TV shows in America. There's very few Black TV shows in America. There's very few Polynesian TV shows in America. You know what I mean? It's not, the choice isn't as broad as it needs to be.
Were these conversations being had around you by the adults in your life or anything?
No,
Not at all.
no, not at all. It wasn't a thing. Like, people didn't notice it. And maybe if my parents had been Black, they would notice, but we weren't. We didn't have any Black neighbors on our street. It was a very segregated place where I grew up. My experience of people of color was going to my grandmother's store in West Philadelphia, and one lunch table in my high school where most of the Black kids sat together and ate for lunch. And I remember, like, anytime that I would go sit with them or they would come sit with me, it would be like a big thing. And I never understood that because I never really looked at race as people being different from me, because again, I was always an outsider. Like, I was always the Protestant kid in the Jewish neighborhood. I was always the poor kid in the rich neighborhood. I never fit in. So it wasn't weird to me when all of a sudden I didn't fit in. I didn't ever really know what that meant.
And that's why hip hop resonated so much with you.
Say it again.
That's why hip hop resonated so much with you, because
Probably.
of
yeah,
that kind of
the fact that hip hop is very in your face. It's very say what you mean. It's very kick in the door. Don't wait for an invitation. Get up and do it yourself. It's a very independent and self motivating art form, right? It's, graffiti is part of that, which is, fuck the police, don't care about laws.
Right.
Hip hop is very aggressive in an assertive way, not in a violent way. It's very in your face. I don't quite know how else to say it, but that. And I resonate with those sentiments greatly. Like, I never waited for somebody to say, okay, it's okay for you to start your own business. I just started my own business.
So 1980, when you see the Grandmaster Flash, show, right? Where they're opening up. How old are you at this time? Like 18?
Yeah, I had just turned 18.
Okay. Can you take us back and talk about how other races were reacting to hip hop at the time? Like, what is the general consensus?
That it was an amazing art form. It was sort of how stories were being spread on the street. Remember, there was no internet back then.
Right.
So in order to get news of what was going on, it would be in rap songs. Not specific news like, Joe Blow got shot at 5th and Market, although sometimes that was the case. But it was more like people were learning, like in Philly, people were learning that the police were excessively brutal to people of color in New York, whereas everybody in New York knew that. We didn't really know that in Philly until the music started talking about it. We didn't know during the crack era how prevalent crack was until the music started talking about it.
Right. And that was my next point, was that, okay, during this time, it is the 80s, it's the crack era, right? Like, what are you witnessing as far as maybe around you or just seeing on TV what is being spoken about?
Yeah, I never really watched TV like that because I'm more of a reader. So it's not fair for me to say what I saw on TV. When I did watch TV, I was watching the Three Stooges or the Flintstones or the Jetsons, right? That was kind of my taste. Bugs Bunny, that was kind of my taste in TV. I never really watched the news. I didn't enjoy it. When I did watch the news with my family always watched the news like at 11 o'clock. But when I was little, I was never staying up that late. But news bored the pants off of me. Like, it was just so, I never enjoyed it. I would perk up when the commercials came on. I would pay attention to the commercials. And then when I was in like middle school age, I thought I wanted to work in advertising because I was always attracted to the commercials. But in terms of what people were talking about, it was more political. It was more like Republicans taking over. And I lived in a Democratic neighborhood, although my parents were Republican. I would hear the difference in politics,
Mhm.
like between Nixon and I think it was McGovern, his running mate. I can't really remember, but I was very aware of politics. I wasn't very aware of racial discomfort or racial strife.
Got you. Okay, so even though you were a reader, you weren't into the news, so you didn't read the newspaper, didn't
No,
pay attention to that
no.
part. Okay.
No. And what's really fucked up is that my parents were. So the newspaper came to our house. Back then it was every morning, and it was called the Philadelphia Bulletin. It was on our front doorstep every day. But because my parents were so into reading the newspaper, I wasn't. You know how like your parents do something and you're like, oh, that's
Right.
them. It was sort of that. So even though I grew up with them being aware of the news, my mom would watch the news at 6 o'clock at night and 11 o'clock at night. And I was very aware that she was in tune with the news, but we didn't talk about it. We didn't discuss it. In fact, the only news I really remember was more economics. Like I remember there was a gasoline shortage when I was a kid. And this was probably in the mid 70s ish. And I remember that we could only go get gasoline on certain days of the week, and it went by your license plate. So if you had an odd number at the end of your license plate in Pennsylvania, you could get gas on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then if you had an even number, you could go Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I don't know what the hell they did on Sunday. Maybe they weren't open. I don't know.
Wow.
But I remember how weird that was. And no matter when we went, we would sit in line. And it was such a big deal. I remember asking my dad was like in charge of gassing up the car, right? I remember asking my dad, hey, can I come with you to the gas station? Because it was so weird to have to sit in line. And of course, he loved the company because it could take an hour for us to gas up the car because the line was very slow moving. So it was it was a very weird time. And I remember stuff like that, but I don't remember racial tension. I don't remember MLK getting killed. I probably would have been 5 when he was killed ish.
Mhm.
I was young. So of course I wouldn't hear that. I was too young for JFK. He was killed when I was 2. There's no way I would remember that. I don't really remember racial tension. I remember more economic news than anything.
Got
And
you.
because I lived in a Jewish neighborhood, I was very aware of like Israeli, Middle East wars and peace more than anything, because that was a very big deal in every school that I went to. My school was probably 85 to 90% Jewish, if I had to make a guess.
Really? Wow.
Yes. 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 On the Jewish holidays, there'd be like 5 kids in class.
That's wow, that's amazing. That's crazy to think about.